Better buckle up, because you're about to explore some of the world's riskiest and nerve-wracking roads. You better pack some water and snacks, and prepare for exquisite views and extreme weather. And most importantly, no matter what you do, don't look down. Let's start with the Asian Karakoram Highway, the highest paved road in the world. It's located at 16,000 feet above sea level. It also stretches for more than 800 miles. If you're a history fan, you'll be pleased to know it follows part of the old Silk Road, an ancient trade route that connected Asia with the West. People used the road to carry goods and ideas between two great civilizations. As it splits the most mountainous region in the world, the Karakoram Highway is quite unpredictable. Rocks can often fall here, and there are also a lot of landslides, avalanches, and floods. When you take into consideration heavy snowfalls and herds of wild animals, you might decide to avoid the road altogether if you're not the most skilled driver. Not a fan of storms either? Well, you really shouldn't be here, trust me. The construction of this road began in the 1960s, and it's a popular tourist attraction these days. Given the altitude and lack of road barriers, many visitors also experience altitude sickness here, which can make driving even riskier. Meanwhile, the Dalton Highway in Alaska isn't a walk in the park either. For starters, at times it gets slippery, which can give a headache to even the most experienced of drivers. This 400-mile-long road stretches through remote forests and over the Yukon River. Since there are only 3 towns along the road, people who need to drive on the Dalton Highway are strongly encouraged to bring their own gear and lots of supplies. The road has a 240-mile stretch with no gas stations, restaurants, hotels, and whatnot. It's the longest stretch of road with no services in North America. What makes the highway even more difficult to travel on is that most of the road is made from gravel. In the winter, it gets even more complicated since the road becomes a lot more slippery. The North Yungas Road is thought to be the world's most dangerous. Why? Well, maybe because it's a single-lane dirt road? Most probably. It connects the cities of La Paz and Coroico, stretching along the side of the Cordillera Oriental Mountains. Should you ever feel the need to look over the edge here, you'd be astonished to see that the ground really is far away, 4,000 to 15,000 feet down. The road was built in the 1930s. Its widest part is 12 feet. With the side, people driving here often have to deal with thick fog, heavy rain, and even some loose rocks every now and then. Add limited visibility and more than 200 hairpin turns to the mix. As scary as it sounds, this famous route is still one of the most popular tourist attractions in Bolivia. Heading over to New Zealand, you're about to visit a 140-year-old unpaved road carved into the side of a mountain. It's so dangerous that you have to get a special permit to drive on it. And don't even think about renting a car, as most rental companies won't allow their vehicles to go to that area. And the standard insurance won't cover any issues you might face there. Bummer. This narrow road goes almost vertically to the Shotover River. So, if you come across another vehicle on the way, you certainly won't be able to pass each other. You'll most likely need to reverse for up to 2 miles to reach a wider part of the road. Local tour operators can take visitors up the canyon if you're really eager to visit the area, and most people are. Why? Well, because this road was a popular backdrop for a lot of movies. Looking for some peace and quiet? The Canningstock route might just be the place for you. You won't get any views here, just a lot of dust and barely anyone around. Not to mention, there aren't many road signs, and it's really easy to get lost here. This completely secluded road stretches for 1,150 miles. You can find it in Western Australia. You'll need 3 weeks to drive it from start to finish, so it's best if you book yourself some time off work if you really plan on visiting. Just don't start your journey in the summer months, as the temperatures there can be almost unbearable. Don't forget to pack plenty of food, water, and spare parts. And most importantly, don't drive alone. You'd better follow a convoy of experienced drivers. Not all of the dangerous roads in the world are located on the edges of mountains or in a desert. Some seem quite unremarkable at first glance, like Commonwealth Avenue in the Philippines. At first glance, it's a regular highway that is a mere 7.5 miles long. But it has 18 lanes and a lot of heavy traffic. It also gets flooded pretty often because of the poor drainage system. And since motorbikes and pedestrians often cross the road in the most unexpected places, a lot of accidents happen here, sometimes also because of poor visibility and excessive speed. Now, let's head to the Bay Bird Road in Turkey. But you really should skip this one if you're scared of landslides or have ever experienced vertigo. This dangerous road is located on the shore of the Black Sea in the northeastern part of the country. Why is it so perilous, you might ask? Well, for starters, you won't find any protective guardrails separating the road from the abyss. Apart from the spectacular view, there's really no point in challenging yourself to go here if you're not a professional driver. The road has a total of 13 hairpin turns at a height of 5,600 to 6,700 feet above sea level, and all that on a stretch of a mere 3 miles. And the incline is also steep, up to 10%. Morocco has a scary road of its own. It's called the Tizian Test Pass. It's a tight, winding road that goes through the Atlas Mountains. It was constructed by blasting out mountain rocks back in the 1920s. Again, it's one of those places you should avoid if you're afraid of heights and steep roads. But if you can deal with these tough conditions, you'll be rewarded with amazing views. There are no safety barriers along the road either, so it's best to travel on it only during the day when it's light. In the winter, landslides and avalanches are a daily occurrence here. Keep that in mind if your car is not prepared for this kind of weather. The Atlantic Road in Averøy, Norway, can offer you a real 3D experience. It winds through a small group of scenic islands in this northern European country. But as beautiful as it might look, it's one of Norway's most dangerous roads. Why? Well, because at times it makes you feel like you're on a real-life roller coaster. The road has a lot of twists and turns. You'll also need to be ready for some serious bouts of bad weather. That's probably the reason why visibility is often reduced here. More so, if you have to drive on this road on a stormy day, you'll have to deal with strong winds and huge waves. Moving on, it's often called the best road in the world by fans of driving, but in reality, it isn't for the faint-hearted either. Transfiguration is a road in Romania, and is probably the most famous one in this country. It winds through some of the highest mountains in this Eastern European country, the Făgăraș Mountains. You won't be able to drive on this road from late autumn to late spring, as it's closed to the public because of frequent heavy snowfalls. Even during the summer, this road is closed from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. for additional safety. Not a fan of bears? Then you probably ought to skip this road, as bears often pop up in this location. These animals aren't dangerous if you don't interact with them, reach out, or offer them any food. Just the bare necessities.
Planning your next trip? You need to find accommodation, book airline tickets, and what else? Make sure you're safe on the road, of course. Some tourists actively seek dangerous destinations, though. The Yungas region in western Bolivia is the perfect place to find adventure. It's home to one of the most perilous tourist destinations on the planet, Carretera de la Muerte, the Death Road. The Yungas Road is around 43 miles long. It connects the capital city of La Paz to a town in the Amazon basin of Bolivia. The local bus covers the distance in some 3 to 4 hours. But why so long? The road from San Francisco to San Jose is roughly the same length. You can cover this distance in under an hour by car. So, what's stopping drivers from doing the same on the Yungas? It's more than one thing. If you want to drive to the Bolivian capital, you'll set off at an elevation of 5,000 feet. But when you reach your destination, you'll be at a staggering 12,000 feet above sea level. After all, La Paz is the highest capital city in the world. If these figures are making you dizzy, you might want to sit down before you hear the next number. The highest peak on the whole road, La Cumbre, sits at more than 15,000 feet. That's the height people go skydiving from. Such high mountains aren't the best place to build a road. But the engineers didn't place the road here for no reason. It's an important trade route. Trucks transport everything from coffee to tropical fruit along the Yungas Road. It's nearly a century old, constructed in the 1930s. In most places, the road is unpaved. Its main surface is a mix of dirt and gravel. The workers carved it out of an almost vertical mountainside. Look down and you'll feel vertigo. There's a drop of some 2,000 feet. It's impossible not to think about this while driving. But there are at least 2 lanes, right? Not quite. Because of the terrain, there's only 1 lane, if you can call it that. The road is rarely wider than 10 feet. By comparison, a Tesla Model S is 6.5 feet wide, and that's without the mirrors sticking out on each side. That would be one tight squeeze. But believe it or not, even large trucks go up and down this path. For the most part, there are no guardrails to prevent the vehicles from dropping into the abyss. And then there's the weather. In summer, the dust from the vehicles decreases visibility, and fog often appears, making the drivers feel as if they were driving blindfolded. In winter, it's no better. Heavy rains make the road muddy and slippery. Torrents can wash away whole sections of the roadway. Landslides occur frequently. A boulder can fall on an unsuspecting driver at any moment. Sounds more like an obstacle course than a roadway. The only good side is that you shower on the go. There are natural waterfalls along the way that travelers use to wash themselves. Until 2006, this mountain highway was the only way to reach the capital from the Yungas region. That's why buses and trucks of all sizes had to squeeze along cliff edges. Sadly, some of them never made it to their destination. On average, 26 vehicles plummet over the edge each year. The total cost in human life? 200 to 300 people lose their lives each year on the Yungas Road. That's really sad. The Bolivian authorities were determined to change something. It took them a full 20 years, but they finally constructed an alternative road. It runs along a nearby mountain range. The new bypass has 2 paved lanes. It's secured with guardrails, and it even has drainage. This helped relieve pressure from the old and dangerous route. Today, there is significantly less traffic than in the 90s. At that time, the Inter-American Development Bank proclaimed the route as the most dangerous road in the world. In come the tourists. Yes, after the locals could finally travel safely across the region, travelers from all over the world took on the challenging road. Tens of thousands of them flocked to the road in search of adrenaline, mostly traveling by bike. But the path is still dangerous. Since 1998, at least 25 cyclists have lost their lives here. The road is so narrow that you don't have enough space to brake. The side of the road is lined with memorials to people who perished riding their bicycles here. But the Bolivian highway isn't the only dangerous destination tourists like to visit. In Africa, there is a natural pool at the very edge of Victoria Falls. It becomes accessible only in the dry season. That's when the water level of the mighty Zambezi River drops enough to reveal the pool. People come here to take amazing photos, but they're just inches away from danger. A rock lip forms the edge of the pool. If a careless swimmer goes beyond it, there is a huge drop, well over 300 feet. The danger is very real. Tourists often forget they're in the middle of a powerful river. More than 1 million gallons of water cascade down Victoria Falls every minute. A complete lack of water can be dangerous as well. That is the case in one region of California, Death Valley. This is the hottest place on Earth. Temperatures here reach 130 degrees Fahrenheit. But tourists are attracted to these extreme conditions. In 2022 alone, more than 1 million people visited the area. Trekking in this desert landscape is highly dangerous. Even driving can cost people their lives. If you have a car accident here, the heat will soon get to you. Dehydration and heat stroke are real dangers. And if that wasn't enough, there are rattlesnakes. 7 species of snakes live in the Mojave Desert. Back in Europe, Ireland is a popular travel destination. In 2019, 19 million people visited the Emerald Isle. That's close to 4 times the population of the Republic of Ireland. Tourists first explore Dublin, but then they want to see the countryside. And the biggest attraction there is as dangerous as it is beautiful: the Cliffs of Moher. They stand on the island's rugged west side. Visitors who try to get close to their edge for a better photo are risking their lives. The drop is 700 feet. One wrong step, and they can fall down from a height greater than the height of the Great Pyramid at Giza. Sadly, this has already happened several times in the past. In Florida, there is a place that looks like a dream to any American surfer: New Smyrna Beach. But there is a danger lurking beneath the waves: sharks. New Smyrna is a hotspot for them. A surfer paddling on his board looks like a seal to the shark below, and seals are their main prey. Since 2010, there have been 32 reported shark attacks in the area. That's why people call this section of the coastline the most dangerous beach in America. Not your ideal summer destination, definitely. Maybe it's better to go to Hawaii. Or not. This atoll hides dangers of its own. The Hawaiian Islands were formed by volcanic activity. These volcanoes attract tourists from all over the world. But slow-flowing lava isn't what's going to get you. It's poisonous gases. Can you guess what VOG is? No, I'm not speaking about the fashion magazine. This is volcanic smog, a mixture of ash and sulfur dioxide. That's the toxic gas you smell when you light a match. And when the lava flow hits the salt water in the ocean, you get laze, or lava haze. These plumes can travel up to 15 miles downwind, and they're not pleasant to inhale. Your eyes become dry, and your throat starts to itch, and those are the less severe symptoms. In a span of just 20 years, 5 tourists passed away due to exposure to volcanic gases.
If you ever think there's no way out of your difficult predicament, just remember there's a man who managed to escape from a whale's throat. No, not Jonah, but Michael Packard, a commercial lobster diver who went down in history after a humpback whale slurped him up near Cape Cod. On this particular day, Packard was 45 feet underwater lurking for lobsters when he felt a huge bump. Instantly, everything went dark. He feared it was the worst. A shark must have attacked him. But then, he saw no sharp teeth around him and felt no terrible pain. He soon realized he was inside a whale's mouth, and the whale was trying to swallow his accidental lunch. The diver was still in his scuba gear and had his breathing apparatus on. He realized he might never see his family again, as he had few chances of making it out alive. But around half a minute later, the whale went up to the surface of the water and started shaking from side to side. He spat Packard out, and the diver landed in the water without any serious injuries, just some bruises. Now, lobster divers normally work in pairs, and one of them stays on the surface to track their colleague. So his crewmate immediately came to the rescue. There was also a charter boat captain nearby, and he helped to pull Packard aboard. Michael was taken to the hospital and left it with a slight limp the same afternoon. Experts say that humpback whales rarely interact with humans, so this big guy was probably trying to snack on some small fish and ingested Packard by accident. The diver would have unlikely fit in the whale's throat because its esophagus is small. So, sometimes, a story really is too hard to swallow. Did I say that? In 2015, an Alaska Airlines flight going to Los Angeles had to return to Seattle after 14 minutes of flying. The passengers aboard heard some loud banging. It was coming from the cargo hold. It turned out that a baggage handler fell asleep down there while the plane was still on the ground. He woke up after a piece of luggage had fallen on his head. Willa Jr. couldn't believe it was happening to him. He didn't expect to survive, but he still called the company he was working for and 911. The call was cut after 44 seconds, so he didn't manage to get a response on what to do. Junior didn't give up and started screaming for help and banging at the ceiling. The passengers who heard the banging started to panic. The crew figured out what was going on, and the plane turned back to Seattle. At that point, the baggage handler also started to panic, but for a different reason. He saw the police, the helicopters, and his boss on the ground and thought he would have to go to jail. He explained he didn't have lunch after 7 hours into his shift and just dozed off. He went back to work the following day and promised he would never fall asleep on a plane again, at least in the cargo hold. In Arizona, a man heard some screaming inside the chimney of his neighbor's house. He called the fire department, and they found a 26-year-old man in there. He spent 4 hours inside the chimney before his happy rescue and was all covered in soot. He explained to his rescuers that he got stuck as he tried to get into his own house after he had locked the keys inside. He went down deep enough to touch the floor with his feet, but got stuck in the narrower part of the chimney near the fireplace. The fire crew lowered a rope down the chimney and pulled the young man onto the roof. He didn't have any injuries and became one of several people in Arizona who have been saved from chimneys before. Someone else fell down while playing, and another guy got inside just for fun. Now, sometimes firefighters don't have to take down flames, but instead pull people out of storm drains. In California, a woman saw legs trapped halfway in a manhole in the street. As it turned out later, a 21-year-old man spent 40 minutes down there. He jumped in, trying to get his cell phone out. Police came to the rescue but couldn't do anything to help. Only the firefighters managed to rescue him using special netting equipment. Later, he told the news channels he had been followed by some criminals. So the next time you use a public bathroom, make sure there's no one sticking out of it. In Norway, a man somehow managed to climb feet first inside a toilet to retrieve his friend's phone. The tank was not connected to the sewer and was only emptied once a season. The brave volunteer stood thigh-deep in whatever was inside the toilet for an hour. Firefighters had to break the toilet to help our hero. He later shared it was the most disgusting experience in his life, and he was afraid of confined spaces. It must have been one priceless phone he went through all this for. He didn't manage to get it out, by the way. Also unknown is whether he remained friends with the phone guy. I mean, come on. Turkish custom officials noticed a Georgian citizen acting weirdly at the border. They decided to inspect his luggage in every detail. They didn't find any banned items inside, except for a 22-year-old girl. She was slim enough to hide inside a regular suitcase in an uncomfortable fetal position. She was trying to smuggle herself into Turkey because she was banned from visiting the country legally. Could there have been a reason for that? Anyway, the couple's plan didn't work out, and they were both sent home to Georgia and instructed never to come back. People who went to chill at Lady Bird Lake in Texas one summer afternoon surely didn't expect to see a massive rescue operation. 911 received several phone calls from those who noticed a boat hanging up against the Longhorn Dam. There were 4 people in the boat, seconds away from tipping over. One of the onlookers, who was fishing nearby, noticed a hand waving from the side of the boat, probably calling for help. The rental boat got too close to the dam and got stuck on the spillway, which was open because of the heavy rains in the area. The small electric vessel didn't have the power to reverse to safety. The emergency services designed an entire rescue plan. They lowered 4 life jackets from a helicopter to the stuck passengers. The fire department prepared to rescue them downstream in case the boat tipped over. Luckily for everyone, a lake patrol boat pulled the rental to safe waters, and all the passengers were perfectly fine. It was probably the only incident of this kind near Longhorn Dam, at least in the past 25 years. A group of 3 friends in the Indian state of Kerala went trekking in the hills. One of them was really tired, and he slipped and fell down a crevice. His friends tried to pull him up with vines and sticks, but failed. And so, the 23-year-old was left on the face of a steep hill, waiting for help. He was sending photos to his friends to make sure they had his exact location. Police and fire department reached the hill the same night, but couldn't help because of poor visibility. They lit torches to scare away wild animals from the location. The Defense Force sent a helicopter to his rescue, but that mission failed. Then 2 units of Special Forces trained in mountaineering, rock climbing, and rappelling arrived at the location. The trekker was starting to lose hope as it was hanging at the height of 1,968 feet for over 40 hours at that point, without food or water. The rescuers promised to bring him some water soon, and it gave the guy new hope. The team decided it would be better to pull the trekker up the crevice, not downhill. 2 rescuers rappelled down to him. One of them previously climbed up to the top of Mount Everest. The adventurous young man was given food and water and then carried upstairs, where he received first aid and was then airlifted to the hospital. Now imagine the scene. You arrive at the airport in Hawaii a bit earlier and decide to chill in the waiting area. Suddenly, you notice an anxious blonde lady in a white dress standing at a gate. She's looking out the window on the runway, waiting for someone's arrival. You reach into your bag for some chocolate to comfort her. But it's too late. She vanished into thin air. Congratulations! You just met the lady in waiting, a resident phantom of the Honolulu International Airport. Like any phantom, she has a grim backstory. The lady once fell in love with a man and he promised to marry her. But then the happy groom flew abroad and never returned to his bride. His betrayal broke her heart and she took her own life. But her phantom is still attached to the airport, and she waits for her man to return just like the famous Japanese dog Hachiko waited for its master. Over the years, the local police have collected numerous complaints about the lady phantom wandering around the gates and other restricted areas of the airport. Also, this entity likes to hang out in public bathrooms, just like Moaning Myrtle from the iconic fantasy novel. Some airport employees reported seeing paper dolls unfolding on their own while cleaning empty bathrooms in the middle of the night. In some cases, toilet seats slam shut and toilets flush by themselves. However, it's unlikely to surprise anyone since many public bathrooms have automatic flushing. Unfortunately, this urban legend doesn't clarify the way to release the heartbroken phantom. But at least this story is a good reminder to think twice before you make any promises. And speaking of spooky ladies in white, the Kempegowda International Airport in India also has one. A pilot once noticed a weird woman in a white sari on the runway. He called the airport workers asking to help her, but she disappeared by the time the staff arrived at the spot. Numerous witnesses have seen the same phantom in other parts of the airport. The lady haunted people in the cargo department, on escalators, and even in the parking lot. According to the media, nobody knows her background or the reason why she's here. Maybe her luggage was lost and she's just trying to get it back. Today, Suvarnabhumi Airport in Bangkok is one of the busiest airports in the world. But it doesn't stop this transport hub from also holding the title of the most haunted place in Thailand. Although imagination tends to draw something old and dusty when we hear the word haunted, Suvarnabhumi is relatively new. It started operating in 2006, but it turned out that the land under the airport used to be an ancient burial site. Work crews had to drain a marshland called Cobra Swamp to prepare the land plot for building. And mysterious events began to occur from the very first days of work. Wailing, creepy screams, and even classic music came out of nowhere. Some builders refused to continue construction because they were too scared of evil forces. The locals believed that they had angered the entities who were sleeping beneath the new airport. That's why 99 Thai monks were invited to perform a ritual. Together, they chanted for 9 weeks to clear all the bad vibes. The ceremony was almost finished, but suddenly a random man interrupted the monks and claimed to be possessed by one of the local entities. His message was pretty clear. You should build a proper spirit house to guarantee the smooth operation of the airport. Having said that, he fainted. Later, the guy woke up feeling normal and conscious. Well, the airport authorities decided to fulfill the mysterious request. Spirit houses are part of Thai traditional beliefs. Landowners build nice tiny shrines to establish friendships with invisible entities who might inhabit their plots of land. So, if you ever find yourself at the Bangkok airport, don't forget to check out this artifact, as well as the churning of the ocean, the remarkable sculptures that depict the ancient Hindu myth. The story is basically about light and dark deities working together to get Amrita, the beverage of immortality. Now, here's another reason why you should think twice before building a transport hub on questionable land. Welcome to Denver International Airport, reportedly one of the most famous haunted airports in the world. It stands on a special isolated plot of land that was considered sacred by its former residents, according to the media. People reported multiple problems and strange incidents going on at the airport from the very beginning of construction. Today, this place attracts numerous mystery hunters, and the number of urban legends around the airport multiplies. Some investigate the hidden meaning behind the local murals and gargoyles. Others believe that the giant cobalt-colored horse statue in front of the airport is haunted. That's because the sculpture, known as Lucifer, took the life of its creator, Luis Jimenez. In 2006, a piece came loose and hit the sculptor while he was finishing his work. The airport's enormous layout and remote location inspire some people to speculate that there's a secret bunker under it. In fact, it's bigger than some real cities like San Francisco, for example. But the spokesman of the airport debunked that myth, saying that this transport hub must support at least 50 million travelers a year, and thus it needs to be huge. Our next destination may inspire you to revisit the Langoliers, created by the legendary horror writer Stephen King. Although the thriller took place at King's hometown airport in Bangor, Maine, we'll be talking about the historic Chandler Airport, located in Fresno, California. This place has many abnormal stories to tell, including reports of people going through the old terminal wall. Some passengers heard disembodied voices in the airport restaurant. The kitchen staff once reported hearing a suspicious noise while cleaning up. They went to see what was going on and witnessed a plate moving across the counter and then falling onto the floor. Perhaps the invisible customer was just upset by overly high food prices. Hey, it could happen. Just like Honolulu Airport, Chandler has a resident phantom. It's an old man in the control tower. Thankfully, this guy doesn't bother anybody. According to witnesses, he's just staring at the field as if he's watching invisible aircraft take off and land. Meanwhile, the urban legend behind Savannah Hilton Head International Airport is spooky and romantic at the same time. It says the following: if you land right after sundown, you'll get the chance to see two phantoms along the north side of the runway. Now, the legend says these are the phantoms of Richard and Catherine Dotson, who used to live on the land underneath the airport. They don't bother the passengers or staff either. It seems like they're just greeting arriving people. Now, our list can't be complete without the UK's Manchester Airport. This busy place serves around 28 million passengers a year and also hosts a few spooky phantoms. Passengers and staff reported seeing creepy figures and weird phenomena, such as doors slamming on their own. The airport archives from the 1970s revealed that some staff refused to show up at Terminal 3 alone after dark because they were too scared. One night, the local workers saw a figure in a pilot's hat entering a toilet. No flights were scheduled to arrive or depart at that time, so he decided to follow the mysterious gentleman. But the bathroom was empty, and the motion-sensitive lights didn't show any reaction to the stranger. Some people reported meeting face-to-face with a phantom of a pilot in an old-school uniform. He usually wanders around Terminal 3 looking disoriented. But unfortunately, no one knows his backstory for sure. Another spooky resident of the airport is the Night Watchman, a phantom of a security guard from the 1960s. A former airport employee once met this gentleman and tried to talk to him, but the figure simply vanished into thin air, leaving the poor guy in shock. After that, he decided to leave his job for good. I can understand that. What's up? Feeling anxious while landing? Hey, there's no need to worry, even if you land in such a particular place as Bhutan. Thing is, the terrain here is so extreme, it makes it super complicated to land. What's interesting about flying there is that there are really few pilots out there who are certified to land in Bhutan. Yeah, zigzagging toward the ground sounds like a real quest. Bhutan Paro International Airport is often named one of the world's most dangerous airports. In the whole world, there are only 2 airlines that fly to this airport. About 10 years ago, there were only 8 pilots who were permitted to fly there, but today the number is a bit bigger. But even so, there's something even tougher than Bhutan Paro International Airport. Seems like the Tenzing Hillary Airport in Lukla, Nepal has every possible danger. Short runway, super powerful winds, mountainous terrain, this place has it all. The runway here is only 1,729 feet long. Just for comparison, a regular runway in most airports is about 10,000 feet long or even more. Now, many airports have carpets in their gate areas. This nicety usually comes with a few other perks: low ceilings, comfortable seats, and a pleasant natural lighting. Needless to say that all those decorations cost airports a pretty penny, and carpets are not as easy to clean as hard floors are. But the key thing here is that they create a cozy feeling for passengers waiting for their flight, making them feel more relaxed. Well, sorry to break it to you, but it's not only meant to make you feel good. According to social research, calm passengers are about 7 to 10% more likely to go window shopping and actually buy something in the lounge area or duty-free zone. So, by investing in the passengers' comfort, airports are likely to increase their own income. Hey, as for spending money in the airport, there's an actual term for the first 60 minutes after you clear check-in: the golden hour. It's the time when passengers statistically spend more money in retail and duty-free areas of the airport. And having the most comfortable seats in those areas right in front of the shops is a clever trick to lure you in for shopping. Let's admit it, sitting in a comfy chair while looking at a flashing sign or shopping window can be tempting, and that's exactly what the airports want you to feel. You know how it sometimes goes? You get to the security checkpoint, and suddenly, it turns out you have something prohibited to take on board in your carry-on. Bye-bye, water bottle. Actually, you have an opportunity to mail them to any address inside the country. As for the unclaimed baggage, it's usually stored for about 60 days. Things taken away by security and not claimed can also get sold at special auctions and are delivered worldwide. Most airports have specific experts called profilers. These people practice what's called SPOT, or the screening passengers by observation technique. They carefully analyze facial expressions, gestures, and behavior to detect suspicious people. Their job is to notice the nonverbal signs of anxiety, such as people licking their lips, itching, or looking around a lot. If a profiler notices a person acting in a weird or off way, they can invite them for an inspection, where they will talk to the person to try to find out more about them. Profilers work in both the main terminals and passport control. The typical question they ask is, "What's the purpose of your visit?" They then check the person's reaction to this inquiry. No matter how reserved a passenger is, if they have something to hide, TSA officers will find out, thanks to the tiniest clues in people's behavior. So, you arrive at the airport already anticipating a couple of weeks away from work and all your daily troubles, park your car in the lot, and then find out that it's going to cost you a small fortune to leave your car there. Why so much? Well, airport parking lots are a business just like any other. The land on which they're built, the construction of the lot itself, the maintenance of the whole thing once it's already in operation, all that costs a handsome amount of money. And somebody has to pay for it, of course. In addition, parking right next to an airport is simply convenient, which adds to the final cost. If you're not ready to dip into your pocket for a piece of extra comfort, better take a cab or have a friend drop you off. Contrails, those white trails airplanes often leave behind them at high altitudes, are easily mistaken for engine exhaust, but most are nothing more than water vapor. During a flight, moisture in the air collects in the engines before being vented with the exhaust. The hot, wet air leaving the engines mixes with the cool, dry air found at high altitudes, resulting in long, thin lines of vapor. Humidity determines when contrails form and how long they remain visible. If it's already humid up there, then there's more water and the contrail is more prominent. And if it's cold, the droplets may turn into ice, staying behind for a much longer time. It might seem odd that the flight crew cares whether your window shades are up or down. The main reason is so the passenger's eyes can adjust to the outside light. Mostly, it's just a matter of getting people on and off quickly. But in an emergency, the last thing they want is people stopping to blink before they evacuate the plane. Another reason for all the shades to stay up when the plane is about to take off or land is for the ground crew to see if there's any trouble on board. For example, if there's a fire in the cabin, the ground crew outside will immediately notice it and act accordingly. If the shades are down, they might lose precious time to rescue the passengers and the flight crew. Looking out the window on a plane's wing, you see a small yellow double hook on it. It seems strange since it might mess with aerodynamics, but it's there for your safety. In case of an emergency landing, these hooks are used to secure ropes that help passengers exit the plane via the wings. If they're slippery, the rope will help you keep your footing and not fall over while going down. Woo-hoo! There are several extremely fast streams of air high up in the atmosphere of our planet. They move in strange ways, but have a more or less constant flow, allowing passenger aircraft to use them. When an airplane comes close to a jet stream, it may adjust to the direction of its current and fly a lot faster, propelled by the flow. Many airlines use this to their advantage to cut fuel costs and make air travel even faster. Clouds, especially thunderheads, can indicate that an area of turbulence is ahead. But sometimes, clear air turbulence occurs when a plane can drop a few feet and start shaking without any warning. It happens when two bodies of air collide at very high speeds and it's absolutely invisible, so the pilots can't tell when it would happen. The chances of getting into an area of clear air turbulence are higher at low altitudes over mountain ranges and near jet streams. Normally, after it's hit by lightning, an airplane is sent for inspection, but it can still safely complete its current flight. The fuselage conducts electricity well enough, and, like a lightning rod, the zap will most probably strike one of the tips of the airplane, either one of the wings or the nose. Then it seeks the ground, but doesn't find it, so it exits from the tail. It's easier for electricity to roll through the surface of the plane than to go inside, so people on board are safe from its effects. Still, lightning is powerful, and there can be some damage done to the plane on the outside. Anyway, if you're still nervous about flying, remember what pilots say. Any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. That didn't help, did it?
Icy water squeezes your chest so you can't take a deep breath. You hear people yelling around. It's late at night, and the endless sea blends with the black starry sky. You're scared and cold. The ship you were just aboard is going down into the depths of the ocean. People who have been in a shipwreck often remain afraid of water for the rest of their lives. But the woman whose story you'll hear survived not one, and not even two, but 3 ship disasters, and continued to work on cruise liners as a stewardess. Meet Violet Jessup, Miss Unsinkable. Her childhood can be described in one word: short. She had to grow up quickly to take care of her siblings. Violet was the oldest of 9 children. Life became even more difficult when she became very ill. The doctors were sure she wouldn't survive, but she did. At a young age, she moved to England with her mother, took care of her sisters, and attended a convent school. Her mother worked as a stewardess at sea, and when she fell sick, young Violet followed in her footsteps. But because of her youth and beauty, No one wanted to hire her. They thought she would distract passengers and crew. Violet didn't give up, though, and came to one of the interviews in her worst clothes and with unkempt hair. She wanted to show she was ready for hard work on the ship, and she had it. The girl was hired. The first 2 years passed quietly, but then a series of incredible fortunes began, or misfortunes, depending on how you looked at it. In 1910, Violet got a job on the most luxurious liner of the time, the Royal Mail Ship Olympic. The ship sailed across the Atlantic from England to America. The engineers didn't focus on the speed of the vessel, but on its comfort. Violet worked on the ship and was paid just £2 a month, the same as £200 today. Hard work on the ship's deck from morning to night didn't frighten Violet. She loved the job. She liked to talk to people and enjoyed the beautiful views of the Atlantic. So, on September 20th, 1911, Violet worked on the deck as usual. The sea was calm and the weather was excellent. Nothing boded ill. The ship sailed through the Solent Strait, which separates the Isle of Wight from the British mainland. At this moment, the British military cruiser Hawke appeared ahead. It should have passed by the Olympic, but something went wrong. The ships went straight at each other. The Olympic's captain tried to maneuver to avoid a collision, but failed. The Hawke's bow was designed specifically to ram other ships. At that time, it rammed the Olympic. Boom! The liner shuddered, and the people screamed in fear and panic. The ship had a huge hole in the starboard. Violet fell from the force of the blow. It seemed one of the biggest liners of its time was going to sink. But luckily, that wasn't the case. Both ships stayed afloat, and nobody got hurt. This time, fortune was on Violet's side. The accident on the ship didn't frighten the young woman. She didn't give it a second thought and continued to work as a stewardess. In April 1912, she took a job on the best unsinkable ship of the time, where she was supposed to serve VIPs. Initially, she didn't want to work on this ship, but her friends persuaded her. And thus, she boarded the Titanic on April 10th, 1912, and left the port of Southampton, for better or worse. The first days of work were peaceful, but on the 4th day of the voyage, one of the most notorious disasters in the world struck. Violet was resting in her cabin. She was almost asleep when she felt the jolt. At that moment, she was called to the upper deck. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, almost no one panicked. No one believed that the unsinkable ship could actually sink. At the time when the ship's hold was being filled with water, everybody was calm on the upper decks. Violet, along with other stewards, was present during the evacuation to the lifeboats. Women and children were evacuated first. Then, one of the ship's officers ordered Violet to get into a boat to show the other women it was perfectly safe. When she did, others followed, and someone suddenly thrust a swaddled baby into her hands. Without a second thought, Violet hugged the child to her chest to keep it warm, while the Titanic was sinking. She didn't let go of the baby until her lifeboat was picked up by the Carpathia, a ship that came to the rescue. Already on board the ship, a woman ran up to her. She didn't say a word and snatched the child from Violet's hands. Violet thought the woman was the baby's mother, so she didn't try to get it back. She was too freezing and numb to think how strange it was that this woman hadn't said thank you to her baby's savior. Many years later, Violet would be reminded of this child under unusual circumstances. After successfully surviving one of the most terrible shipwrecks in history, Violet continued to work at sea against all odds. In 1916, she took a job as a nurse on the hospital ship Britannic, a sister to both the Olympic and the Titanic, which sailed in the Aegean Sea. On November 21st, the ship took a route that it had already sailed several times, but on that particular day, it was out of luck. The Britannic hit an underwater mine. Violet managed to survive the third shipwreck in her life. This rescue wasn't as easy as the previous two, though. After the explosion, the huge Britannic began to sink quickly. It took less than an hour for the ship to go down completely. Violet didn't have time to board a lifeboat, so she jumped overboard into the cold water. There, she swam to the closest lifeboat and got on. But the rescue turned into a new danger. The ship's propellers were still working. They were spinning in the water and pulling the boat toward them. Violet jumped off the boat just in time to escape the propellers. But her ordeal was far from over. Already in the water, she was pulled under the ship's keel and hit her head. The only thing that saved her from losing consciousness, and probably her life, was her thick hair. In the end, Violet got away from the engine and was picked up by another boat. For the next few years, Violet was plagued by headaches. When she finally went to the doctor, he told her she was incredibly lucky. As a result of the incident on the Britannic, she had a fracture in her skull. 3 disasters that Violet managed to survive didn't stop her. She continued to work on cruise liners until 1950. She cruised the world twice on the luxury liner Belgianland. Fortunately, the string of mishaps ended, and Violet was never shipwrecked again. In 1950, she moved to Great Ashfield in Suffolk County. She'd worked at sea for almost 42 years. Content with her career, she settled in a large cottage built in the 16th century. But a year into her retirement, she received a strange phone call. It was late at night. Violet was asleep when the phone rang. She picked up the phone. There was a woman's voice on the other end. The lady didn't introduce herself and asked right away, "Excuse me, was it you who saved a baby on the Titanic?" Violet answered, "Yes." "It was me," the strange woman said. She laughed and hung up. Violet told her friend about this strange call. He assumed that some kids were playing a joke on her. But Violet had never told anyone about the baby before that call. According to the old records, the only child who was on the boat with Violet was a boy. But those same records also said the boy had been saved by another passenger. It's still unknown who the baby that Violet rescued was. And so, for surviving 3 different wrecks on 3 different ships, she was aptly dubbed Miss Unsinkable. We've heard stories about people surviving in the desert, Amazon forest, and uninhabited islands for weeks. Such stories show how tough and resilient people can be. But among these many cases, there is one that can really amaze you. It's the story about a guy who spent 3 days inside a sunken ship at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. He didn't have oxygen tanks, electricity, communications, or food, but he survived. So, it all happened in 2013 on a tugboat that was moving through the Atlantic waters along the coast of Nigeria. That day, early in the morning, there was a small storm. The tug was pulling a vessel with oil tanks. Then, all of a sudden, a huge wave formed. It crashed into the ship and broke the cable. At 4:30 a.m., the tugboat turned upside down. Its entire deck was underwater, and the ship's hull stuck out from the surface. The boat began to sink slowly. The crew of 12 people were trapped, as they all were in their locked rooms. They had closed the doors in their cabins as a precaution, since there were many pirates in those waters. Because of the locked rooms, they couldn't get out. But one of them, cook Harrison Okina, was in the bathroom during this time. The bathroom turned over. Harrison fell on the ceiling. All the clothes and toilet shelves fell on his head. He was stunned and didn't understand what was happening. When he heard the screams of the other crew members, he realized that the ship was sinking. Harrison struggled to his feet. Holding on to the walls, he slowly went out of the cabin. The water level rose above his head. Harrison took a deep breath. He intuitively, driven by fear, reached the engineering room. There was a small pocket with air. This space wasn't wholly flooded, since the water didn't get there, and the air hadn't come out. Harrison realized that this was the safest place for him at that moment. He had no fresh water and no food. He was in a cold, damp room. The floor was flooded, and Harrison's feet began to freeze. There was almost no chance of survival. The man found a soda bottle inside the room and a life jacket with 2 flashlights attached to it. By this time, the ship had descended to the bottom of the ocean at a depth of 100 feet. This is about the height of a 10-story building. The ship's hull was squeezed and made a grinding noise due to the pressure of the water. Then, Harrison heard a strange movement outside the door. It was sharks and other fish that were investigating the deck. At this point, Harrison began to lose hope. Lack of food supplies and pressure weren't the main problems. The air pocket was small, which meant there was little oxygen. Every 24 hours, an average person consumes about 350 cubic feet of air, which means Harrison had less than 1 day left to breathe. But despite this, he lived in such conditions for about 60 hours. This happened thanks to the water. The pressure around the ship was so intense that it compressed the air by about 4 times. Another problem was the cook's breathing. When we inhale, we absorb oxygen. When we exhale, we release carbon dioxide. This substance is dangerous to your health if its concentration in the air is 5%. Harrison slowly filled the room with carbon dioxide, and he couldn't get out. With each hour, it became harder to breathe. But here again, he was lucky. Water absorbs carbon dioxide, and Harrison moved and splashed it in different directions. Thus, unknowingly, he increased the water area and kept the carbon dioxide level below critical. But even here, his dangers were not over. Hypothermia may occur in a dark, cold room. It's a condition when your body temperature drops below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. You get cold, and your perception of the world gets distorted. You don't understand where you are and what's going on. You may lose your memory and even experience terminal burrowing. This weird behavior occurs during hypothermia when a person tries to find a small shelter, even if they're in a closed room. They can even start digging the cold floor with their bare hands. At the same time, a person quickly freezes and loses consciousness within 2 hours. Harrison's room was filled from below with icy water. He wouldn't have survived in such conditions if he had stayed on the floor for several hours. But he managed to build a small platform with a mattress. This kept him slightly above the water level. With each passing hour, fear and despair more and more bound the survivor's mind. He couldn't get out for many reasons. One of them was that only a little sunlight passes to such a depth, and Harrison couldn't see it. The soda bottle was almost empty, and the flashlight stopped working. The man found himself in pitch darkness, but his salvation was close. While rescuers were searching for survivors nearby, he was thinking about his family and life. Harrison noticed rays of light through a hole in the wreckage. Divers were examining the seabed. It was the only chance to survive. Harrison came out of the air pocket and swam towards the rescuers. He was making his way through the darkness. The ray of light coming from the diver's flashlight disappeared. Harrison tried blindly to find the diver, but they were at the other end of the deck. His oxygen was running out, so Harrison decided to return. There was almost no air left in his lungs. He began to suffocate, but still got to the rescue room. The main thing was not to despair. It was his only chance for salvation. After catching his breath and replenishing the oxygen supply in his lungs, Harrison made a second attempt. He got out of the room and noticed the diver. He swam towards them with all of his might. The lifeguard didn't see Harrison, so the cook knocked on his neck from behind and grabbed his hand tightly. The diver was initially scared, but he realized a living person was in front of him. Harrison swam to his room and led the lifeguard as his oxygen ran out. You can easily find a recording from the diver's camera on the internet, where the frightened Harrison was in his rescue room during a meeting with the diver. The rescuers gave him an oxygen mask. They didn't believe there was a living person in front of them. Harrison couldn't immediately get to the surface because of the pressure. He spent about 60 hours on the seabed, so he needed to change the pressure level slowly to prevent damage to his health. Therefore, the divers put him in a decompression chamber to gradually reduce the external pressure. Then, when Harrison got out, he saw the stars. The cook thought that he had been at the bottom of the ocean all day, so he was surprised when he found out that he had been underwater for 60 hours. Also, he thought that all the crew members had forgotten about him and left the ship at the beginning. Many years have passed since then, but Harrison still has nightmares about his air room. Sometimes he wakes up in the middle of the night and tells his wife that the bed is sinking and they're now at sea. A similar case occurred in 1991 with scuba diver Michael Proudfoot. He was studying a sunken submarine off the coast of Baja California. During this dive, he accidentally broke his breathing regulator and deprived himself of oxygen reserves. Michael couldn't get to the surface because he was too deep. He wouldn't have had enough air in his lungs. Fortunately, the diver found an air pocket inside the ship. He swam there and waited for rescuers. For 2 days, he was underwater in complete darkness. He ate raw sea urchins and drank a small amount of warm water from a found pot. Fortunately, rescuers found him. Michael Proudfoot got out of the trap and stayed alive.
Hey, want to hear something shocking? In an ordinary house outlet that we use to charge the phone, the voltage is 110 volts. A high-voltage power line that provides electricity to dozens of buildings has a voltage of 100,000 volts. The energy of one lightning strike is more than 10 million volts. Woo! And the temperature of lightning is almost twice the temperature on the sun's surface. And this incredible charge is flying at a speed of just 2.5 times slower than the speed of light. Now imagine what happens to a person when lightning strikes them. Well, let me tell you, the discharge passes through the body in 1/100th of a second. Lightning can stop our hearts and disrupt the work of our entire nervous system. You may not even realize what has happened at first. Perhaps you will lose consciousness and your body will be in a state of shock. Every day, there are several million lightning strikes in the world. Fortunately, you have little chance of getting hit by one. The odds that lightning will strike you is about 15,300 to 1. About 20,000 people are struck by lightning every year. The chances that lightning will strike you twice are even smaller. And what are the odds that you'll be struck by lightning 7 times throughout your life? It seems impossible, but one person experienced it for himself. His name was Roy Sullivan. He was born in 1912 in Greene County, Virginia, in a big family with 7 children. Roy was an ordinary guy and was no different from his brothers and sisters. But for some reason, the natural element chose him. In 1936, he began working as a ranger at Shenandoah National Park. There, lightning struck him 7 times over 35 years. So, the first accident happened in April 1942. On that day, a strong thunderstorm began. Roy took refuge in a new fire tower where builders hadn't installed a lightning rod. Lightning struck the building several times. A massive fire started inside and Roy ran out. As soon as he was a few feet away from the shelter, lightning hit his toe and burned a hole in his shoe. The next time occurred 27 years later, in July 1969. Roy was working in the national park. He was driving a truck through hilly terrain when a storm started. Lightning struck him through the open car window. The charge burned his eyebrows and eyelashes and slightly touched his hair. Roy lost consciousness and the car continued to move. It stopped at the very edge of a cliff. 15 minutes later, Roy came to his senses. A year later, in July 1970, the third time occurred. The weather was fine, but in a matter of minutes, clouds became thicker and a thunderstorm began. Lightning struck a transformer near Roy. The man ran away as fast as possible, but nature got him again. Lightning hit his shoulder. 2 years later, in 1972, lightning struck Roy for the 4th time while he was working at the National Park Station. The charge set his hair on fire, and the man ran to the bathroom and used a wet towel to put out the flames on his burning head. From that moment, Roy began to suspect that some invisible evil force had been pursuing him. He started to carry a bottle of water with him to put out the fire in case of another hit. The 5th strike happened in the national park again. It occurred in 1973. Roy tripped over a rock and fell. At that moment, he noticed thunderclouds in the sky. Frightened, he ran to his truck, got inside, and stepped on the gas. Roy drove as far from that spot as possible. Then he stopped and got out of the car to see where the storm was. And at that moment, lightning struck again. It went through his left arm and left leg and set his shoe on fire. Roy quickly climbed back into the truck and extinguished the fire using his water bottle. In 1976, the sixth case occurred. Roy was walking along a trail in the park, just 1 mile away from the place where lightning struck him the last time. And then storm clouds appeared again. Lightning flashed and stung Roy in the palm. After the sixth strike, he began to suspect something was wrong with the park. After 40 years of working, Roy finally decided to quit. Finally. He hoped the lightning would stop chasing him, but he was wrong. By that time, the man had already become a celebrity. But such fame didn't let him enjoy life. People were afraid to be near him because they believed the lightning could hit them at any moment. Journalists gave Roy Sullivan the nicknames Spark Ranger and Human Lightning Conductor. Of course, the man disliked all of this and felt very lonely. But besides this problem, he also suffered from constant fears and the feeling of persecution. All the time, he was waiting for the lightning to strike again at any moment. Fortunately, he was married. His wife supported him and helped him in everything. After quitting his job, Roy decided to move with his wife to the small town of Dooms, Virginia. Wow, Dooms. Talk about foreshadowing. It was only a year without accidents. Then, on June 25, 1977, lightning struck Roy again. He went fishing at the local pond early in the morning. The catch was good, but the sky was overcast. Roy immediately felt there would be a strike. There was a smell of sulfur in the air, and the hairs on his arms stood on end. His whole body tensed. Lightning struck Roy in the head, passing through his chest and stomach. The man ran to his car to take cover. At that moment, a hungry bear came out of the forest. He approached Roy's bucket of fish to pick up all the trout the man had caught. Roy ran out of the vehicle with his hair on his head smoldering to chase the animal away. After the seventh lightning strike, he lost hearing in his left ear and realized he couldn't hide from the lightning anywhere. His wife was afraid to be with him outside during a thunderstorm. One day, she was hanging laundry in the backyard. Roy came out of the house to help her. A few minutes later, lightning struck his wife. Fortunately, she wasn't badly injured. After that, besides fear and social loneliness, he felt guilt. Of course, many doctors and scientists tried to help Roy, but no one managed to find the reason for this strange phenomenon. According to science, each time it was just a coincidence. Mathematics and physics were powerless here. With such answers from scientists, Roy believed that invisible forces were pursuing him or that fate was punishing him for something. Perhaps the answer lies in the man's past. The National Park Service and doctors documented all 7 times when he was struck by lightning. But there was another 8th time, which couldn't be confirmed. According to Roy, lightning struck him in his youth when he was helping his father mow wheat. The discharge hit the scythe blade. No one but the boy saw it. Perhaps at that moment, the lightning changed something in his body and made him more attractive for the next hits. Lightning always chooses the path of least resistance. And this is how lightning occurs. Rain, ice, and snow particles collide with one another inside a storm. This process increases the imbalance between clouds and the ground, negatively charging the lower layers of clouds. Things down there, like trees and the earth, get positively charged and create another imbalance. Nature tries to remedy this imbalance between the two opposite charges by passing an electric current through them. Perhaps nature felt some charge imbalance in Roy's body and tried to remedy it. But why did he get struck at an interval of 1 to 2 years? Besides, more than 20 years passed between the first and second hit. Scientists still can't explain what happened to him. Maybe Roy was just an attractive guy. As you can probably predict, Roy Sullivan was listed in the Guinness Book of Records as the person struck by lightning most often in the world. We've heard so much information about this terrible tragedy that happened on the night of April 14, 1912. What really caused the disaster? Could the Titanic passengers have been saved? Was the ship cursed? All these questions still remain unanswered. So this time, let's not focus on the tragic side of the event, but on the fantastic stories of people who miraculously managed to survive that day and what happened to them in the future. As you know, when Titanic crashed into the iceberg, the ship's crew first evacuated the women and children. But among the passengers, one woman remained on the sunken vessel and survived after it went underwater. Her name was Rhoda Abbott. She and her 2 sons lived in England and had been living there for 2 years before they decided to return home to Providence, Rhode Island. Rhoda bought 3 third-class tickets for the most modern and unsinkable ship of that time. The whole family slept in their cabin on that ominous night from April 14th to 15th. They didn't feel the jolt and got up only after the steward knocked on the door. He asked them to wear life jackets and go to the upper deck. Then, along with other third-class passengers, they waited in line to board the lifeboats. The crew members allowed only women and little kids to go further. Still, the brothers negotiated with the team and walked their mother to the lifeboat. All 3 went to the last lifeboat, but the crew asked the sons to leave since not all the women had been evacuated. Rhoda didn't want to leave her sons, so she decided to stay with them. She left the boat and hugged the boys. By this time, the ship was sinking into a stern-up position. The deck tilted. Rhoda tried to hold her sons but couldn't. She slapped off the deck and fell into the icy water. From there, she swam to the lifeboat that was washed away from the deck. Rhoda climbed aboard and watched the Titanic go under the water. Unfortunately, she was unable to save her 2 sons. Besides her, there were 13 people in the boat. But in the end, no one except Rhoda survived. A few hours later, the ship Carpathia arrived and found a nearly frozen Rhoda in the boat. The vessel arrived almost 3 days later in New York, where Rhoda was hospitalized, and she lay there for about 2 weeks. Swimming in cold water caused her asthma, which remained with her for life. Later, she admitted that she hadn't regretted that she had refused to evacuate with other women because she got a little extra time to spend with her sons that night. Another survivor of Titanic was Violet Jessup. She boarded the ship not as a passenger, but as a working staff. She was hired by the White Star Line, which was looking for people to serve wealthy clients on the new luxury liner. And on April 10th, after an interview, Violet boarded the Titanic. The first days of work went as usual, but then the ship crashed into an iceberg. In the beginning, no one panicked and didn't even want to believe that the unsinkable boat could go down. But while the people on the upper deck were having these conversations, water flooded the ship's hold. Violet, along with other stewards, helped people evacuate. One of the ship's commanders ordered Violet to get into the boat first to show everyone else it was safe. She obeyed and spent several hours there until rescuers came for the survivors. But the most exciting thing in this story was that before the Titanic, Violet had already been in another shipwreck. The ship where she worked as a steward collided with another vessel at sea. All the people were saved, and Violet got a job on the Titanic a few years later. But even after the famous shipwreck, she didn't change her profession and went to the Britannic Floating Hospital. And you know what? It also sank. Violet managed to survive for the 3rd time, but this didn't scare the girl. After all these events, she continued her work on other ships. She survived 3 shipwrecks and got a name for this, Miss Unsinkable. One of the bravest passengers of the Titanic was the ship's chief baker, Charles Jogan. On the night of April 14th, he woke up after the collision with the iceberg. During the few hours as the ship was sinking underwater, Charles helped the passengers. First, he ordered his bakers to supply all rescue boats with food, then helped the crew evacuate the passengers. He was one of the last people left on the ship when all rescue boats were on the water. But still, he continued to save people's lives. Charles started to throw deck chairs overboard so people could hold on to them. Then, when half of the Titanic went down, he lowered into the icy water, where he noticed a capsized rescue boat. Charles boarded it and waited a few hours until rescuers appeared. And the most incredible thing is that he was completely fine when the Carpathia arrived and found him. He had not even a scratch and wasn't at all hypothermic. Among the Titanic's surviving passengers was Margaret Brown, known as the unsinkable Molly Brown. She was visiting a friend in England with her daughter. But when Margaret found out her grandson was ill, she immediately bought a ticket to New York on board the Titanic. After colliding with the iceberg, Margaret bravely helped people evacuate until the stewards forced her to get into a boat. She continued to help other passengers until they were rescued by the Carpathia. Margaret created a survivors committee and raised about $10,000. At that time, it was quite a lot of money. For many years, she protected and supported the Titanic's passengers, who were in poor financial condition. Margaret also helped to build the Titanic Memorial in Washington. A wealthy English businessman, J. Bruce Ismay, was on board the Titanic, and the shipwreck was not the only disaster for him. He managed to jump into the last boat 20 minutes before Titanic was completely submerged. Thus, he saved his life but condemned himself to eternal contempt. When he was on the mainland, the newspapers began to write about him as the main coward of the Titanic. Also, some articles accused him of sinking the ship. Ismay was a White Star Line company director that created the ship. And according to newspaper articles, the businessman asked the captain to sail faster. He wanted the ship to arrive in America ahead of schedule and receive good reviews in the press. As a result, the ship crashed into the iceberg at high speed and damaged the hull. Nobody proved the businessman's guilt. Almost all of the criticism of Bruce Ismay was concentrated in one newspaper. Its publisher had a fight with the businessman before the tragedy, so they decided to destroy his reputation. Britain organized an independent investigation, which concluded that Ismay did nothing wrong. Yeah, he jumped into the last boat, but only after all the women and children were evacuated. However, the investigation didn't help to clear his reputation. In England and America, many friends and colleagues turned away from him. For many years, Ismay compensated the families who lost someone on the Titanic. The most famous passengers of the Titanic were an orchestra of 8 musicians. In the beginning, there was no panic when the ship collided with the iceberg. Many refused to get into the boats, as it seemed to them that it was safer on the Titanic. Others were sure the breakdown on the ship would soon be repaired. Some people didn't believe the ship could sink. A minor panic began when everyone realized a catastrophe was imminent. To calm the people down a bit, the 8 musicians from 2 ensembles started playing music. Survivors said the orchestra played until the very end. Fear for their lives and the nearness of the end didn't confuse the valiant men. Unfortunately, they didn't survive, but a memory about them was written in history forever, and their musical instruments became world-famous artifacts and very valuable items at auctions. Be alert and save your life. Words to live by. Here's a list of to-dos. If a power line falls near you, you should run away. Electric current is now everywhere on the ground. When it comes into contact with one leg, it passes through the person's body and exits through the other leg, thereby hitting the whole body with a powerful charge. If you get lost in the forest, listen carefully to the sounds around you. Perhaps you'll hear the sound of a flowing river. Go toward the sound and then go downstream. People often build houses near the sources of water, ponds, or lakes. Sooner or later, the river will lead you to a place where people will find you. Never eat snow if you get lost in a cold place and are thirsty. Cold snow inside your body will lead to hypothermia. You'll lose heat and freeze quickly. It's much better to melt some snow on a campfire and then drink it. See those green potatoes in the supermarket? Don't eat them because they're toxic. Potatoes, or potatoes, produce solanine, a toxic that protects them against insects. The production of this poison increases under the hot rays of the sun. Of course, to get poisoned by solanine, you need to eat a lot of green potatoes. But even if it's just one potato, it won't be good for your body, so why eat it? Pepper spray is good for self-defense, but if you're afraid to use it, you can keep a bright flashlight in your bag. Point its light in the robber's eyes to scare them away. Besides, this way of self-defense won't harm the robber, and you won't cause any unnecessary problems. If you leave a frying pan with oil on a turned-on stove, the oil may catch fire. In this situation, extinguishing the flames with water will be a big no-no. Water molecules will descend to the bottom of the pot, evaporate, and push the oil up. This will lead to even more flames. The best way to put out a hot oil fire is to deprive it of oxygen. Cover the pan with a lid and remove it from the burner. Flames are not the scariest thing about a fire. Smoke is much more dangerous. You can get poisoned very quickly by inhaling carbon monoxide. Therefore, always try to stay as close to the ground as possible and cover your mouth and nose with a wet cloth to filter the oxygen. Always put a small mirror or whistle in your pocket when you go camping. These two items will help you find your group if you get lost. The whistle will attract others' attention with sound, and the mirror will do it by reflecting sunlight. When you're swimming in the sea or ocean near the shore, there's a risk of getting caught in a rip tide. An undercurrent will pull you further and further away from the beach. Don't try to swim to the shore against the current. You will only waste your energy. Always swim parallel to the shore in such cases. Once you escape the current, you can safely return to the shore. Imagine that your car gets stuck on railway tracks. Well, don't panic. First of all, get all the passengers out of the vehicle. Then you can call 911 and report the incident. There's a special number at each level crossing. Tell the number to the police, and they will warn the train driver to stop at the specified section. If you start feeling unwell in a crowd, don't ask all the people around for help. Most likely, no one will help you. Not because people are bad, but because every person passing by will think that someone else will help you. But if you choose one person and ask them for help, you'll have a better chance to get it. Every car has a thermometer, a device that shows you the temperature of air outside. Sometimes, manufacturers put its sensor behind the front bumper, near the engine. While driving, the thermometer gets heated by the engine and shows you a higher temperature. Even if it's freezing outside, the device can indicate that it's warm. Therefore, don't trust the thermometer if it's installed this way. What if there's some ice on the road and you're driving completely sure that the asphalt is dry? Smell that? A sudden strong smell of fish in your house may mean an electrical fire has started in some room. Your socket or adapter is on fire, emitting this unpleasant odor. Using regular baking soda is a good way to put out a fire. If you don't have a fire extinguisher or access to water, sprinkle the fire with this powder. Also, this substance can hide your smell from predators. It's helpful if you've gotten lost in the forest and don't want wolves or bears to smell your scent. Use ordinary charcoal and a plastic bottle to clean dirty water. Cut off the bottom of the bottle and close the lid slightly on the upper part so that the liquid pours out in a thin stream. Put the coal in there and add some water. Let it pass through the charcoal several times. Then heat and boil the water. Now you can quench your thirst. Always take some gum with you when going to the wilderness. If you get lost, chewing gum will help you relieve stress. You can also use this material as glue. Always keep your car keys next to your bed. If a thief enters your house, use the keys to turn on the car alarm and scare the thief away. But installing a good security system in your home is even better. While skiing or snowboarding, there's always a chance of getting caught in an avalanche. If you find yourself under a layer of snow, don't try to get out immediately. Your mind is confused, and you need to know where is up and where is down. Spit and see where the saliva flows. Then start digging in the opposite direction. When your plane makes an emergency landing on the water, your instinct can force you to put on your life jacket immediately. Don't do this until you're in the water. If you put on the vest and water starts to fill the cabin, it will be difficult for you to move. So get to the emergency exit first, then put on the jacket. When you feel someone is following your car, make 4 right turns. This way, you will make 1 circle around a block. And if the car is still following you after that, drive to the nearest police station. While walking outside, you may notice or feel hairs on your head starting to stand on end. Look for shelter quickly. Lightning is about to strike you. Service dogs are wearing special jackets with the inscription "Service." If such a dog approaches you, you need to follow it. Perhaps you will save someone's life. If a person gets in trouble and no one is nearby to help, the dog will start looking for someone to save them. During a fire, the flames spread more slowly if the doors in the room are closed. So when you go to bed, close the bedroom door. It'll hold the flames for a while. But don't forget that it's always better to have a good fire alarm. Tornadoes move fast, so if you notice a vortex that seems to be standing still, you must run. It means the tornado is moving right towards you. The smell of gas in a room indicates a leak. Therefore, don't turn on the light. The smallest spark can set the whole house ablaze. When you scratch a person, their DNA remains under your nails. This can help you in case of an attack, especially when the robber has run away and you want to help the police find them. If you've disturbed a hornet's nest or a beehive, run in any direction as fast as possible. Sooner or later, the insects will stop chasing you. But if you jump in the water, they'll wait until you get out. There are very snowy winters in Sweden, you know. Snow covers all roads and slows down the traffic. Some cars may pull over to the side of the road and get out only with the help of a tractor. This is a common thing. But one day, during a snowfall, something astonishing happened. On December 19, 2011, a man named Peter Skylberg found himself in a snow trap after he drove off the main road in the north of Sweden. Then snowmobilers accidentally found him, pulled him out of there, and took him to the hospital. It may seem like something common, but here's the kicker. It took 2 months to find him, and outside of that time, the temperature dropped to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. That man survived after spending 60 days without water, food, and heat sources among icy winds and endless snow. The people who found him said the car was buried deep in snow at 3 feet. And Peter Skylberg was sitting shaking inside a sleeping bag in the front seat. He couldn't speak. When they brought him to the hospital, the doctors were amazed. They knew cases when people survived in cold temperatures for a long time, but not for 2 months. A person can live without water for several days, but Peter had no problems with this since he extracted water from the snow. Without food, a person can survive for several weeks to 3 months. But what about the cold? How did Peter solve this problem? At such low temperatures, people can freeze within several hours. The doctors treating Peter claimed that his body seemed to activate survival mode and fell into a deep sleep. It's like bears that hibernate during winter. But the human body can only lower the temperature by a few degrees. This is not enough to survive in minus 22 degree frost. Maybe the man somehow managed to lower the temperature even more. The case of Peter Skylberg became famous. Doctors and scientists from all over the world put forward their hypotheses about how this man managed to survive. No one could give the exact reason. Many people claimed it was just a real miracle. Others believed it was the result of several factors combined together. One of these factors is the sleeping bag. It helps keep your body heat better so your temperature may not drop for a long time inside the bag. Another factor that probably played the key role was the igloo effect. Indigenous peoples living at the North Pole make their homes out of ice and snow. You've probably seen these round houses on the internet or in the movies. It's not warm inside them, but it doesn't let the cold in. The particular design of these houses helps keep the accumulated heat inside. Igloos can protect from strong winds, but it's possible to survive inside them only if you're wearing warm clothes. Perhaps Peter's car turned into such a house. Snow clung to it from all sides and blocked the heat inside. Many people wondered why he hadn't tried to get out and find help. But seems like Peter did the right thing. It's pretty dangerous to go out in such conditions. You don't know where you are, it's freezing cold, and there's a blizzard. Let's say you get out of the car and try to get to the nearest road. You fail and come back. But you can't find your car because the snow has covered it. Now your situation is even worse. The only option is to start digging snow and make an igloo. If you have warm clothes, an igloo will help you to keep warm and gain some time. But the right solution is to stay inside the car and wait for the rescuers, especially if you don't know where you are. If you don't have communication or signal lights, then try to make a fire. Smoke can attract the attention of people passing on the nearest road. Peter Skylberg spent some time in the hospital, regained strength, and was cured. Now, it's much safer to be in a closed cold room or an igloo during the cold. However, if you're stuck in a severe frost without warm clothes, you have about 30 minutes to 2 hours, maybe even less if you don't move. But in 1980, a miracle happened that shocked people and doctors all over the U.S. 19-year-old Jean Hilliard was driving home at night to the small town of Lengby. She lost control and ended up in a ditch. The girl decided to walk to her friend. She then saw her friend's house, but she didn't get there. She got too weak and fainted. Suddenly, Jean fell and lost consciousness near her friend's house. Jean Hilliard was wearing a light winter coat, cowboy boots, and pants, so she wasn't quite prepared for harsh winter conditions. There was a strong blizzard and snowfall outside, so no one noticed her. The friend Jean wanted to visit only saw the frozen girl near his porch in the morning. Jean Hilliard had been lying there for 6 hours. Her body was hard and cold, as if it were made of rubber. Her eyes looked as if they were made of glass. The man who noticed the girl was sure she wasn't alive. But then, he saw bubbles of moisture from her nose. The girl was breathing. He got the girl to the hospital. Her body wouldn't bend, so putting the girl in the car was problematic. The doctors immediately rushed to help Jean, but that wasn't easy. They couldn't even make any injections, as the needles would constantly break. The muscles were too stiff and frozen. Her body activated emergency mode and stopped supplying muscles and soft tissues with blood. All the red liquid was directed at the vital organs. Also, in emergency mode, our organism can slow down all internal processes of the body. The heart starts pounding slower, the lungs consume less oxygen, and the metabolism nearly stops. Such energy savings helped the girl to survive. But the doctors were more surprised that Jean didn't get any serious troubles. She got frostbite, but the ice crystals didn't destroy her skin and soft tissues. Doctors decided to warm the girl with a bunch of heating pads. Then they finally managed to inject medications. A few hours later, she regained consciousness. The test showed that Jean was in perfect health. Meanwhile, you can get into a severe trap not only in nature and bad weather. You can get stuck in an elevator in a building full of people in Manhattan, and no one will know about it. This happened in 1999 with Nicholas White. The 34-year-old manager was working late in the office and decided to take a break. After getting some fresh air outside, Nicholas called the elevator to go back to the 43rd floor. But he got trapped in the elevator. It was already quite late, and almost all the workers had left the building. But the worst thing was that it was Friday night. Nicholas had no phone, no food, and no water. He pressed the emergency call button, but no one answered him. The cameras worked perfectly, but the guards didn't see him. The building was basically empty. Nicholas struggled with claustrophobia, walked from side to side, jumped, laid down, tried to open the doors, and waited for someone to rescue him. There were repair workers on the other floors, but they didn't hear Nicholas. Also, his colleagues stayed in the office where he worked. They were sure that Nicholas had just gone home. They left the office using other elevators and didn't notice that Nicholas had left his things on his desk. Well, Nicholas was in despair. He was rescued 41 hours later. He was lying on the elevator floor, tormented by thirst, when he suddenly heard a voice from the elevator speaker. "Hey, is anyone there?" Rescuers got the man out of the metal box, and the building owners paid him compensation for the inconvenience. Despite this nightmare, Nicholas continued to use the elevators. Yeah, living in Manhattan, it would be problematic to avoid them. Certainly for Nicholas, life has its ups and downs. The plane broke into 3 large pieces and crashed onto the hillside, scattering parts all over the snowy ground. The wings ripped off, and the main body of the aircraft split into 2 parts. Flames crackled from what was left of the airplane. 7 out of 9 crew members survived the crash. They were all part of the 1946 U.S. mission to map the Antarctic continent. There were 13 ships, 23 aircraft, and 4,700 people to do the job. They only had 2 months of summer down there before the weather got too bad. USS Pine Island took 3 seaplanes on their mission. One of the planes, called George 1, had a crew of 9 people. They went on their first 10-hour mission. Later, when it was time for the second flight, the weather got worse, with stormy seas and low visibility. But they decided to take the chance and fly anyway. It was supposed to be an epic adventure, and even the captain of Pine Island joined the expedition. The pilot, Ralph "Frenchy" LeBlanc, was very experienced and not worried about the weather. The plane was tied to some small boats, but the waves were so strong that the lines holding it were damaging the plane's metal body. Crew members had to attach 4 special rocket boosters, called jet-assisted takeoff bottles, to help the plane lift off. It managed to do so after a run of about 5 miles, but got straight into a blinding snowstorm. James "Robbie" Robbins was just 19 years old back then, but already had 1,500 hours of experience as a radar operator in that type of seaplane. He once successfully flew 9 hours through thick fog and clouds in Greenland, so he trusted his abilities. The radar showed a mountain range 20 miles ahead and icebergs spread out, and it was all correct. They had to stay low to take photos for mapping, and it was impossible in bad weather. So the pilot decided to turn the plane around to head back to the ship. Suddenly, the plane hit something. At the time, they didn't know what it was, but later they realized it was a snow-covered ridge that was hidden and couldn't be seen on radar. The loud bang shocked everyone on board. The pilot and co-pilot quickly pushed the plane's controls to try to lift it back into the sky. But just a few seconds later, the fuel tank in the front of the plane blew up. Collapsing with a ridge likely cracked one of the fuel tanks, so the gas started to leak. The fumes from the gas might have been set on fire by an electrical spark or the plane's hot engines. The blast was so strong that it broke the plane into 3 parts. The pilot was hurt and stuck upside down in the burning front part of the aircraft. Some of the other men were also badly injured. Some crawled out of the wreckage, and others had been thrown out into the snow during the crash. Most of them couldn't even remember the bang or the impact. The crew managed to pull the trapped pilot out of the wreckage and put him into a sleeping bag inside the back part of the plane. They also tried to help Frederick Williams, who was severely injured. They placed him on a piece of debris to keep him still and wrapped him in blankets to keep him warm. Unfortunately, even though they did their best to take care of them, Williams passed away a few hours later. Sadly, the navigator and the radio man didn't survive the crash either. 3 crew members had only 1 blanket, so they took turns staying in the middle where it was warmer. For the first 3 days, the weather was really bad. It snowed a lot, and the sky was super dark and cloudy. The crew started looking through the wreckage for anything useful. Near what used to be the back part of the plane, they found 3 big boxes of pemmican. It's a kind of emergency food that has everything you need to stay healthy, but it's not the most delicious food on Earth. Each box had about 100 paper cups filled with this special food. They also found better food in the flight rations. There were steaks, potatoes, canned veggies, bread, butter, salt, pepper, sugar, canned milk, a few cookies, and even 2 big cans of peanut butter. They had enough food to last for a while, and they figured the pemmican would help them get through the long, dark winter if necessary. All of the fresh food was hidden in the snow, where the kitchen used to be, so they had to dig it out. They got most of the sugar by licking it off the snow and separating it by taste. The crew also found a small 2-burner stove in the emergency supplies, but they didn't have any fuel. Luckily, the plane had some fuel left in the tanks, so they tapped one of the lines and had enough to last a long time. They kept the burners constantly on to melt snow to fill 2 or 3 water holders that held about 4 or 5 gallons each. It seemed like it took 15 or 20 pots of snow to fill just 1 cup of water. After 3 days, the weather got better, the sky was clear, and the sun was shining brightly. From where they were, they could see the ocean down the hill. While exploring the wreckage, they found more sleeping bags, a camera with film, and other supplies like a sled and a life raft made for 9 people. Days went by, and the sun never went down. Huge, hungry seagulls hanging out right next to the wreck were getting on everyone's nerves. To distract themselves a bit, the crew played an old Navy game called Salvo. It's like a battleships game for 2 players, where your task is to find and defeat all the ships of your rival. They also took some photos of everyone and the wreck from different angles with a Brownie box camera they had on the plane. The radar man painted big yellow letters on the airplane's wings with the names of the deceased crew members to make sure rescuers knew what had happened. On the 13th day, a rescue plane finally showed up. Everyone shouted, waved, and did everything to get the pilot's attention, but the plane didn't stop and kept flying. 2 hours later, it came back, and Robbins, in a hurry, threw fuel onto a pile of flammable stuff to set it on fire. The bang was so big, it burned his eyebrows, but it worked. The plane turned and flew toward them, wiggling its wings as a sign it saw them. The pilot dropped a note attached to a weight. It said, "If you can walk to the lake, make a circle. If not, form a straight line." The lake was 10 miles away, but they knew they had no choice but to get there, and so they made a circle, signaling that they were ready for rescue. Then they got to work. They stacked sleeping bags on a sled and placed their injured pilot on top. Robbins took a compass from the crashed plane and attached it to the sled's handlebars to help guide them. 3 men pulled the sled while another walked behind, making sure they stayed on track. The snow was so deep that they often sank up to their waists. The journey only got easier when they reached solid ground, so it took them 24 hours to walk the 10 miles to the shore. As they got close, a thick fog rolled in, so they couldn't see the rescue plane. But the pilot started the engines, and the crew followed the sound. Soon, 2 rescuers arrived in a raft and helped them paddle out to the waiting plane. They climbed aboard and flew back to their ship, the Pine Island. All the survivors were taken to the USS Philippine Sea and later returned home. For 6 of the 9 men who crashed on Thurston Island, life continued. Now, you know your odds of getting struck by lightning are 530,000 to 1. You already knew that, right? The chances that you will win the lottery at least once in your life are 500,000 to 1. The possibility of winning the lottery twice is almost 0. Now, this incredible story may seem like fiction since its events seem so unreal. It's unlikely that any director would want to make a film about this because the audience wouldn't believe it. You can easily find evidence on the internet if you don't believe it either. So, here we are in Australia in 1998. Meet Bill Morgan. He lives on the outskirts of the country in a trailer park. Bill works as a truck driver, so he gets behind the wheel of his car and goes off to work. During the ride, he feels unwell. Bill stops the car and loses consciousness. Somebody notices him and calls an ambulance. They take him to the hospital. Doctors immediately determine that Bill has had a heart attack. They give him the necessary treatment with medications, but Bill's condition worsens because of an allergic reaction. His heart stops. From a medical point of view, if it doesn't beat for 7 minutes, it means that a human has passed away. Bill's heart hasn't been working for about 14 minutes. It seems there's no chance, but doctors continue to fight for his life. And then a miracle happens. Bill comes to life. The heart is beating again, but the patient's brain doesn't show signs of life. Bill is in a deep coma. A few days have passed. Doctors understand that Bill has a risk of remaining in a vegetative state for the rest of his life. Even if he regains consciousness, his brain will still be damaged. 12 days have passed. The doctors offer Bill's family to disconnect him from the life support machine, but they refuse to do it. At this challenging moment, the family meets a specialist from another hospital. He tells them about some experimental treatments that might help. They have no guarantees that Bill will survive, but at least they can try. The family agrees and transports Bill to another hospital. After being treated with the new medication, Bill spends another 15 days in a coma. Then, one day, he comes to his senses and goes on the mend. What happened to him is what doctors call a medical miracle, but real wonders are waiting for him ahead. He returned to his trailer park on Melbourne's outskirts and continued living there with his girlfriend Linda. 12 months have passed. Bill works as a driver again. He proposed to his girlfriend and is preparing for the wedding. He gets into the truck and goes to the city on business. On the way, he stops by a store and buys a lottery ticket. He scrapes off the protective layer and realizes he's just won a Toyota Corolla, which costs about 30,000 Australian dollars. Wow! Bill can't believe his eyes. Considering Bill had health problems after a heart attack and couldn't work much, the new car was a great gift. A few days later, a local TV channel contacts him. Producers want to make a report about Bill. They were amazed not because Bill got a lucky lottery ticket, but because he came out of a coma before that. And so, reporters come to him, take a short interview, and then go with him to the city in the new car. The director wants Bill to buy a lottery ticket and erase it on camera so that later, during the editing of these shots, the announcer tells Bill's story. So Bill buys the ticket, goes to the table, wipes the protective layer with a coin. His eyes widen. He takes the ticket and reads it several times. "I just won $250,000, he says, and doesn't believe it. The cameraman thinks Bill is joking, but he looks pretty serious. "This is not a joke," he says. He shows the ticket. Yes, it's true. Bill won the lottery for the second time and did it in front of the cameras. You can easily find the video on the internet and see his reaction to the event. Bill calls his girlfriend and tells her the good news. With this money, he finally moves out of the trailer and buys a real house. Life is getting better. Bill has his real estate, a car, and a beautiful wife. He regularly buys lottery tickets, but wins nothing. At least, that's what he says. By the way, the luckiest person on the planet is Frano Selak from Croatia. One day he was traveling by train. Something went wrong and the train derailed. Several of the cars fell into the river. Frano miraculously survived. He was able to swim to shore and call for help. A year after these events, Frano was flying on a plane. Right in the sky, an emergency exit door ripped off the plane. Frano flew out with other passengers and was the only survivor. People found him lying in a haystack. They took him to the hospital. Frano has no serious injuries and left the hospital. A few years later, in 1966, the man had an accident on a bus trip. The vehicle left the road and fell into the river. Frano remained alive and unharmed. His adventures didn't end there. In 1970, he was driving his car on the motorway when his gas tank caught fire. Frano left the vehicle in time. It exploded in front of his eyes. Frano realized that some magic had been happening with his life. He lived quietly for the next 3 years. All this time, he felt that something else bad was about to happen soon. And he was right. In 1973, a fuel pump spilled gasoline on his car and body at a gas station and caught fire. Frano survived again and got almost no damage. But there were two more severe disasters ahead of him. The first happened in 1995. This time, he wasn't driving the car or sitting inside the plane. He was just walking. He crossed the road and saw a bus moving towards him. It was too late, and the bus hit him. Fortunately, Frano survived. He wasn't surprised anymore and just wanted these accidents to stop. The last thing happened while driving his car on a mountain road. Suddenly, a big truck appeared in the opposite lane. It was moving towards him at great speed. Frano managed to jump out of the vehicle and stay alive. His car exploded, and he got minor scratches and bruises. It's hard to believe in such luck, or maybe it was bad luck, considering that Frano had been in disasters so often. In any case, many people decided to verify the authenticity of these stories. It turned out that nobody could confirm plane and train crashes. There were no reports of these incidents. Perhaps Frano invented all this or added some fantastic details to make his story more unbelievable. We'll never know the truth, but one thing about this man you can know for sure. After all these trials, Frano got really lucky. He won almost $500,000 in the lottery. He bought a luxury house but then sold it. After all the disasters that he has experienced, he realized that money wasn't the main thing. He married 5 times in his life. And so, after selling the house, he returned to a modest home to spend the rest of his life with his beloved 5th wife. All the remaining money, Frano spent on a complicated hip operation and charity. Wow, imagine if Frano had been an Uber driver. Would you get in the car with him?
Marriage is not only about happiness, mutual support, love, and friendship. Marriage is also about trials, crises, and storms. And this Swedish couple survived several storms during their honeymoon. Literally. Not screams, insults, and drama, but real hurricanes, fires, earthquakes, and other natural disasters. This is a really cinematic love story. Newlyweds against nature. Meet Erica and Stefan. They met in Stockholm while working on a joint project, parted, but started chatting with each other on social networks. Their long-distance communication lasted for several years before Stefan decided to ask the woman out on a date. And it's worth paying tribute. It wasn't a typical date in a restaurant or in a park. Stefan suggested that Erica fly with him to go diving in Egypt. They realized that they both loved to travel and finally fell in love with each other. After a fabulous wedding and the birth of a beautiful daughter, the couple decided to go on a 4-month honeymoon. The tour was impressive. From Sweden to Indonesia, then to Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and China. They didn't expect that the trip would turn out to be a real adventure where safety was not guaranteed. At first, they got stuck at Munich airport. All flights were delayed because of a severe thunderstorm. In Bali, Indonesia, they went to a high mountain with their little daughter. A strong wind began to blow at the top. It tore off the roof of the tourist bus where our heroes were sitting. Fortunately, no one was injured, and there were no other problems. But at that moment, it was just a teaser of the coming disasters. The couple arrived in Australia, where a wildfire first started near the city of Perth. Stefan and Erica didn't want to cough up thick smoke, so they quickly left for the city of Cairns. It was during that period when a ferocious cyclone began there. The storm was so strong that the Australian Red Cross Service provided shelter for 2,500 people in the mall. And there, another problem began. Imagine 2,500 people in a big, hot room without electricity while a hurricane is raging around. Oh, and there were only 5 toilets in the entire building. How nervous do you think people were? Eric and Stefan recall that some guys started fighting because of stress. The tension was getting stronger, but fortunately, the mall guards kept the situation under control. Wildfires, hurricanes, it seems that something is missing. Oh yes, what about an earthquake? The couple faced 2 earthquakes during their honeymoon, one of which happened in Japan in 2011. They went through all this together with their little daughter. Just imagine how their daughter was amazed by all these adventures. Such a trip strengthened their marriage. Of course, after natural disasters, any domestic quarrel would seem like a mere trifle. Erica admitted that in crisis situations, Stefan fully justified her trust and behaved as she had hoped. Oh, how sweet. What if we create tours for married couples who are planning to divorce? Survive the storm, fire, earthquake, and flood together, and then think again whether you should leave each other. Imagine that you've gone through several natural disasters in your entire life. Now the question is, are you lucky because you've survived, or are you an unlucky person because you've run into such troubles? It depends on how you feel about it. For example, there's a woman, Dana Weiland, who lives in California. She has survived several disasters throughout her life and continues to smile. And more recently, she's faced another disaster, wildfires in her home state. But let's take it in order. In 2005, Dana Weiland lived in New Orleans. And if anyone doesn't know, that year, Hurricane Katrina destroyed many houses in this and other cities. Dana's house was no exception. According to her, the lower floor of the house was completely flooded with water. Of course, she had to give up everything and evacuate. Dana and her family drove to Texas to a friend's place for about 20 hours. 1 month later, Hurricane Rita arrived there, and Dana and her family evacuated again. It looked as if nature was following her around, but our heroine was not one of the timid ones. Several years later, she faced another disaster, Snowmageddon. This was when a huge amount of wet, cold snow flooded cities and roads. Strong wind, blizzard, and endless snowfall. All traffic stopped. The lights turned off. The streets were empty. Dana sat for 11 days without electricity during this snow apocalypse. And after all these disasters, she got the exact opposite of snow. Wildfires in her hometown of Lake Arrowhead in San Bernardino County. Let's hope that this time, everything will be fine with her again, and she will meet any adversity with a smile on her face. Have you heard that lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place? Can it hit the same person twice? What if it strikes the same guy 7 times in a few hours? This is not a movie plot in a tragicomedy genre. This is the real story of Roy Sullivan, a man who got into the Guinness Book of Records for the number of lightning strikes survived. There are more than 8 million lightning strikes on Earth every day, which is about 100 strikes per second. But even so, the probability of getting struck is extremely low, 1 chance in 10 million. For Roy Sullivan, these chances were too high. For his strange record, people nicknamed him the Human Lightning Rod. For the first time, lightning struck him in 1942, when Roy was on a watchtower that didn't have a lightning rod. A bright flash of light and a powerful current discharge scarred the man, but didn't cause crucial damage to health. The next accident occurred in 1969, when lightning struck a tree near the road. The lightning passed through the tree to a car. Guess who was driving this vehicle? Roy lost control and almost drove off a cliff. Fortunately, he stayed alive again. Okay, the first time he was on the tower during a thunderstorm. The second time was on the road next to a tree, and as we know, lightning often strikes trees. This meant Roy was in a potential risk area every time. But the third time happened in his front yard. Lightning struck the transformer and caught his shoulder. The fourth time happened in 1972. Lightning struck Roy while he was working. From that moment on, the man began to suspect that this natural phenomenon was somehow attracted to his body. Maybe it was a curse, or maybe everything could be explained from a scientific point of view. A year later, lightning struck him for the 5th time. A thunderstorm started that day. Roy decided not to try his luck again and hid in his truck. And so, when the storm calmed down, Sullivan got out of the car and bam! Another lightning strike. There were 2 times left before the record. They occurred in 1976 and in 1977. Roy's bad luck spread to his wife. One day, lightning struck her too. It didn't hurt her, but scared a lot. So far, no one has broken Ray's record, but obviously people haven't tried to do that. Okay, lightning, fires, snowstorms, hurricanes, and earthquakes. But how about tsunamis? Unfortunately, This is one of the most terrible and devastating disasters on the planet. If you survived it, you're definitely lucky. Zarul Fuadi from Indonesia survived these devastating water disasters twice. The first occurred in Indonesia in 2004. And the second happened a few years later during an earthquake in Japan. During the second time, Zarul was in the building on the third floor and felt a jolt. He was shocked and immediately remembered the tsunami he had experienced before. The tsunami hit the city, but our hero and his family survived. After this double trouble, he decided to move to his homeland, Indonesia. Despite the terrible events, Zarul looks at what happened calmly. Any catastrophe can happen to any person at any moment, but it doesn't mean you should live in fear forever. So, he focused on the bright side of life.
A story that will surely send chills down your spine is about a daring young American sailor named Tammy Oldham Ashcraft. Back in 1983, when she was just 23 years old, she had quite the adventure. Along with her British beau Richard Sharp, she was tasked with navigating the ocean from Tahiti to San Diego in California on a luxury yacht. But you know how the ocean can be? It's not always smooth sailing. 20 days into the journey, the two lovebirds got ensnared in a Category 4 hurricane, coming with monstrous waves and wicked winds. Even though they stood their ground against the raging waves, the yacht was rolled over like a beach ball as it tumbled between two waves. The last thing etched in Tammy's memory before being knocked out cold for 27 hours is Richard shouting as an enormous wave slammed onto their boat. Later on, she penned down her harrowing ordeal in a book, which was later turned into a movie. Tammy had her fair share of sailing experience under her belt before the fateful journey. She had great navigation skills and had already sailed across the Pacific twice. Setting off from Tahiti to San Diego, they initially had a decent journey, but a couple of weeks in, trouble started brewing. They caught wind of a tropical area down by Panama, and before they knew it, the storm was charging west and gathering intensity. The pair made efforts to reach the safety zone, but the hurricane was moving at incredible speed. As fate would have it, the usually short-lived hurricane kept going. Facing giant waves and hurricane winds is enough to give anyone nightmares. The boat took a hammering, and despite their best preparations, dealing with such rough seas was a monumental task. The boat would leap into the air over the towering waves and come crashing down, making the whole structure shudder. Richard was in the cockpit, secured with a safety harness as they bobbed over the massive waves. But then, they ran into rogue waves. Those monstrous anomalies that come out of nowhere. One such wave made the boat do a 360-degree flip, and that was the last thing Tammy remembered. When she came to her senses, Richard was nowhere to be found. The safety harnesses meant to keep him attached to the boat were ruptured. With no one nearby to pick up her distress signals, Tammy was left with a non-functioning long-distance radio after 2 weeks of relentless battering from the sea. All she had was a short-range, very high-frequency VHF radio, which gave up after 5 days due to water damage. She was alone and completely cut off. Tammy had to rely on her basic tools to navigate to Hawaii, a sextant and sight reduction tables. Using the sun's position, she determined her latitude, and once she found her watch, she could also figure out her longitude. It took a while, but she did make it to Hawaii. Throughout her time being lost at sea, Tammy showed just how resourceful she was. She remembered trying to get the engine running, but some of the boat's parts had melted onto the propeller shaft. Despite being mechanically inclined, she couldn't waste time trying to fix something that was potentially beyond repair. Instead, she relied on her training as a bosun. Tammy also kept a log of her time at sea, always aware that if she didn't make it, this might be the only clue to what happened. Looking back on the log, she admitted that her mental state had been fragile during her ordeal. Despite everything, Tammy shared that the human survival instinct is incredibly strong. She wanted to live. The hero of our next tale is a man named Steve Callahan. His story, though it sounds like a Hollywood movie script, is real as real can be. Back in 1982, Steve found himself participating in a single-handed sailing race across the vast Atlantic Ocean. He trusted his voyage to a self-designed vehicle, proudly named Napoleon Solo. It was a sturdy, reliable boat built to weather storms and defy waves. But unpredictable weather loomed in, tearing into the race fleet and sinking a bunch of boats. Steve had to sideline himself and dock his beloved Napoleon Solo in Spain for some urgent repairs. After patching up the boat, Steve took off again, this time setting his sights on the Canary Islands. His heart was set on crossing the Atlantic and reaching the sandy shores of Antigua. Sadly, his boat was battered by strong winds, leaving it significantly damaged. Steve found himself with no choice but to abandon the ship. He soon boarded an inflatable life raft. Steve decided he wasn't going down without a fight. Before Napoleon Solo sank into the depths of the Atlantic, he dived repeatedly into the turbulent waters to salvage what he could. With a few essential items secured, he battled hunger, thirst, and loneliness for the next 76. Some fishermen eventually found him and whisked him off to a local hospital where he began his recovery. Now you might think this is where Steve's story ends. His incredible saga of survival was shared far and wide in sailing magazines, featured on numerous TV shows, and finally cemented in his own book. But the record for the longest time ever spent lost at sea was broken by a man named Jose Salvador Alvarenga. He is an incredibly tough soul whose tenacity and will to survive would become the stuff of legends. That's because for 438 long, difficult days, he was adrift. A fisherman by trade, Jose was no stranger to the sea's unpredictable moods. His life's most terrifying adventure started on a day just like any other, in 2012. That was the day Jose and his fishing mate headed off the shores of a quaint fishing village named Costa Azul in Mexico. It was their first voyage together. Life, however, had a nasty surprise in store for them. Soon after they had left the comfort of the shoreline behind, they were ambushed by a furious storm. It tossed their small boat about like a toy, steering it off its course. Their ship's motor and most of their onboard electronics were rendered useless. Jose, displaying his quick thinking, managed to radio his boss for help before the communication device gave up, but the response was as powerless as their situation. For 5 relentless days, the storm messed with them. When the skies finally cleared, Jose and his mate found themselves lost, with no idea of their whereabouts or how to get back. To make matters worse, the storm had taken away most of their fishing equipment, leaving them with mere basic survival tools. Their boat no longer had sails, motors, or oars. Month after month, they drifted aimlessly. Their sustenance came from good old Mother Nature, rainwater, and a random collection of sea critters like fish, turtles, and birds. After about 4 months, Jose lost his friend, but he decided to carry on, in hopes he'd one day be rescued. Little did he know, he was nowhere near the end of his journey. He attempted signaling every passing ship he saw, but his desperate cries for help were useless. Relying solely on rainwater and whatever the sea offered him for food, Jose kept track of his days by the changing phases of the moon. It was a bit over a year after the disastrous storm that Jose finally sighted land. His heart filled with hope, and he abandoned his trusty but worn-out boat, choosing to swim towards the shore. To his amazement, he found himself on one of the Marshall Islands, situated on the far side of the Pacific from where his ordeal had begun. The man was taken to a hospital where he slowly but steadily recovered his strength. Upon his return, his family declared they had never given up on him and were over the moon on the news of his discovery. However, this survival story was so fantastical that many raised their eyebrows in doubt. Could a man really survive for so long at sea on a tiny boat? However, there were those who offered a counterpoint. Experts explained that fresh meat from birds and turtles, which Alvarenga claimed to have consumed in plenty, contained enough vitamin C to ensure survival.